Hey guys, so Houdini 20.5 is out. I'm really psyched about it. I think it's the best release in years. I hope you all have a ton of fun playing with it. There's a ton of awesome new features in it, including Copernicus, of course, the new NPM solver, the new Vellum minimal solver improvements, and of course updates to character animation and rigging with Apex. And I wanted to make a video first just to show the stuff that I've sort of started to figure out in terms of character rigging animation with Apex using the Apex auto rig components. I think that the vision for how these are supposed to work is really smart, and I think that where side effects needs to eventually get to is make it so that people can relatively easily, with tags and these auto rig components, make like 95 or 98% of the rigs that they could ever want, and without having to dive deep into the Apex nodes themselves or Apex script or Python or anything like that. So let's jump in and I'll show you sort of the stuff that I've figured out so far, as well as some of my frustrations with it, and talk about sort of where I hope some of it goes. I hope you enjoy, and let's jump in. So first off, what I have here is my character. My character's been skinned. You should know how to do this already. If you don't, definitely check out some other KinEffects and rigging tutorials. I've covered this stuff a bunch of times in a bunch of my videos. And we have the skeleton over here that can drive that. And the classic kind of setup with KinEffects is to have the Geo go into the first input, the skeleton, that's the rest skeleton, go into the second input, and then the animated skeleton that you can animate and, you know, set keyframes with and sort of, you know, do whatever kind of stuff you want with, go into that third input. And, you know, I can set a couple of keyframes here and make my guy kind of animate and have some fun with that. I also want to point out that I've just set up some basic sort of lights in the viewport. And now if you turn on this high quality lighting mode, you get some really nice sort of just straight out of the viewport looks. It looks a lot better than the viewport used to look now that we're using the new Vulkan viewport in 20.5. And there's some fun settings in here. You can turn on like ambient occlusion, and I don't think reflections will do anything because of my shaders, but you can play with all that kind of stuff. I also have out here a hair groom that I did on my character. And I set this up basically using the same sort of tricks that I used in the groom tutorial that I just posted on my YouTube the other day. So check that out if you're curious about how to set up a character groom. But you'll see that right out of here, you get also these like super nicely shaded curves in the viewport. The clipping plane is sort of messing with things here, but you can see like these are basically looking like properly sort of shaded tubes, and they're also casting some soft shadows on the head and stuff. I mean, it's like not, you know, amazing or anything, but for the viewport and what we've been used to with Houdini, I think it's a pretty great upgrade. So I'll dive back in here to the scene, and what I've done over here basically is set up some basic stuff where I've sort of taken this hair that I've sculpted, peaked it out a little bit, and then done this distance from geometry node on top to kind of create the density attribute that I end up using to drive the hair. And then I've sort of painted this layer of peach fuzz where I want to have sort of little extra hairs on my character Regis. And then for good measure, I just sort of set normals and a tangent using the polyframe node. So I have all that. And then over here, I also have all these blend shapes that I've created, which you can see if you middle click on here, are basically all packed geos. This kind of stuff is really easy to do, and it's really easy to add these kind of blend shapes. So I'll just show really quickly. If I blast out, let's say, I'm going to select by name and click on the head. If I blast that out and then delete non-selected, I just have this head now. And now in Houdini 20.5, we have this awesome new sculpt node that I can then use to do some much better sculpting than was really possible before. I'll change this brush to the move brush, which is usually what I want to use if I want to sculpt some blend shapes and move my character around. And so I could make him kind of smile a bit up here and, you know, sort of like just give him a nice big smile. And this could be one of the blend shapes that I want to use now. Great, so now I have the geometry here for the character, the rest skeleton, and the animated skeleton. These all plug into the bone deform, and I have these two blend shapes here that I want to use. Now, what I historically would have done is used a attribute copy, and I would say, okay, I want to copy the positions from this blend shape over here to the original mesh, and I'm basically using the attribute copy to make it so that I'm just copying over the positions of the head. And I have to set this to be P instead of CD. And so now this has basically made a blend shape, and I could call this smile and do the same thing here and call this frown. And then I could do a blend shape node here and plug these both in. And because it's all keeping that bone capture attribute data up here, then I'm able to basically, if I say update channel from names here, play with these sliders to mess with these blend shapes, and then have it sort of do the blend shapes before it does the bone deform. And that bone deform still works on the blend shaped geo. And this is like a pretty standard sort of workflow for rigs. You have the blend shapes be applied before you do the bone deforming. And this is kind of hacky and requires lots of nodes and is kind of a pain. And also, if you wanted to export this kind of animation to, say, an FBX file, for example, this wouldn't actually work because all this animation here is happening at point level, and it doesn't have all sort of the blend shape data stored in the attributes and whatnot here. So we're not going to use this. What I learned recently instead is kind of the correct way to do this, that will work with FBXs and such, is I can use a, well, first of all, one thing that I want to do is I want to do an attribute delete, and I want to kind of clean all the attributes off of here. And I want to do the same with this one, just because I don't want it to transfer a bunch of attributes. And then I want to do a character blend shapes add, which is going to let me add these blend shapes into here. But if you hover over here, you'll see what this is looking for is not just like a blend shape or some blend shapes. It's looking for packed blend shapes. And you can easily pack these blend shapes by using a merge packed node, which is a super handy node that was added a couple versions ago. And you'll see it names these based on the names of the nodes that are piping in. So I'm going to call this smile instead, and I'll call this one frown, and I'll make a new merge packed node. And now if we pipe these into here, we're giving this character blend shapes add what it wants. And so now we have some blend shape channel attributes as primitive attributes. But still, what do we do with this? How do we get this to actually work? How can we animate these blend shapes and whatnot? So with FBXs, when you bring them in, all the animation data kind of lives on this animated skeleton input. So what we need to do is figure out a way to create the attribute that is going to drive those blend shapes. And to do that, we need another one of these character blend shapes node, and it's going to be character blend shape channels. So this is looking for the skeleton, which I'll plug in right there. And then this is optionally giving you the ability to add a mesh in here. So if you do that, then it will grab this blend shape info from here and use it over here. If we say update from input and hit update, it'll add these channels over here. And now we have this frown and smile detail attribute floats that are basically our blend shape channels that we can animate. But it still isn't doing anything, and that's because we need one more node that's going to actually apply all these blend shapes, and that is going to be the character blend shape channels, character blend shapes, rather, which goes right here. We plug this in, and we try to use this. We'll see, uh-oh, this is broken. Now, the reason this is broken is because I forgot up here in the character blend shapes add to specify which of the shapes within the character that I want to apply the blend shapes to. And in this case, it's the head. It's using that head name attribute as a group here. Now, if we play with this, it'll work wonderfully. And it'll also work if you apply the bone deform after. So again, it's that same kind of setup that we had with the blend shape before, where we're applying blend shapes, and then we're doing the bone deform using all the bone deform capture attribute fun stuff. So cool. This is how you could set this stuff up, and you could export a character with blend shapes now using the ROP FBX character output. And I can plug this guy in here, and this guy in here, and this guy in that third output here. And now I could totally export a character as an FBX. But that's not what we want to do. We want to bring this into KineFX. So how do we do that? Well, if we want to do that, then we actually don't need any of this stuff. We just need this character with this blend shapes. And I've already created these other blend shapes over here that we can also add in. So let's use those. And in fact, let's just use those instead of these crappy ones that I just created for demonstration purposes. So I'll delete those. And let's figure out how to make this character in Apex now. So to bring this character into Apex land, the first thing that we're going to do is create a pack folder. This is going to sort of like pack the character into the structure needed for Apex. And so in that second input, we're going to drag in that geo with the blend shapes and everything, just as the character shape. And then we're also going to bring in the rest skeleton. And that is technically all that we need, although there's a really important and pretty smart thing to do if you're building rigs with Apex, which is to create a guide skeleton also. And a guide skeleton is just going to be basically the same thing as the rest skeleton, but you can add extra bones or joints or whatever to add extra points for things if you need helper things. You can also add a bunch of tags, which is a really handy feature that allows you to kind of create rigs more procedurally. And I think the vision and promise of the auto rigging stuff using components and tags is really smart and a really good goal for where side effects should be trying to go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a attribute array adjust, or adjust attribute array rather. And this is how we create our tags. So you'll see by default, the attribute name is set to tags. And then what we need to do is change it from attribute class being detail to the class being point. And then what we can do is we can just select different things. So I'm going to select, for example, these three joints. And I'm going to press A to add a tag, and I'm going to call it L_arm. I'll select these three joints and create a tag, and I'll call it R_arm. I'll select these joints, maybe this one also, and make a tag called spine. And this isn't like names where we can have multiple tags for things. So I could also, set a tag here and call this one hip, and now it has both that hip and spine tag. I'm going to also select these ones and then just say L leg. I'll select these ones now, and of course I'm saying R leg. I can select these, and I can just say foot for these maybe. For these over here, I'll say fingers. I'll also set the fingers here. And then maybe these here can be jaw, and maybe all of these here can be head. So that's sort of a rough sense of how I could set this stuff up. Another thing is I want to be able to create an FBIK rig with this stuff. So I'm going to select the joints that I would want to use for the FBIK rig and tag them as FBIK. So I'll select this joint, this joint, this joint, this joint, this joint, this joint, and maybe I'll select the head joint up here as well. And hit A again, and I'll type FBIK, enter. Great, now we have those tags. So those all go into the pack folder here. And you'll see we have this name, and then we have the type over here. So the name for our geometry, we want it to be called base, which is sort of a standard Apex thing. And for the skeleton, we also want it to be called base. And then for the guides, we want those to be called guides with a capital G. And then over here, you can hit this button to kind of get a sense for what sort of suffixes you might want to add. So this one is going to be called a shape because it's a geometry shape. And this one, we want to have it be a skell or a skeleton. And same with the guides skeleton. So cool. Now we have all that stuff. Now we can start setting things up for Apex. And if you middle click here, you'll see we have these 3 packed geometries here. And this is sort of like the starting point for what you need to be able to start setting up things with the Apex auto rig components. So I'll drop down an Apex auto rig component. And first we'll see nothing. By default, it's set to use snippet. And here is a little sort of like Wrangle type box where you could write Apex script stuff. I'm not familiar with that at all yet. Maybe I will be, maybe I won't learn it. Maybe it's going to be sort of over my head and meant for more technical riggers. We'll see. I hope to get into it at some point. But the first thing that we want to do usually when setting up an Apex rig is just set up the, where is it? FK transform right here. So this is sort of like by default, sort of how our rig might be set up with KineFX. And it lets you rotate and stuff, but it doesn't let you right out of the box transform stuff or scale stuff. And I do want to have that option. The other thing is that right now on the source tab, this is set to use our base scale. And this is a little bit confusing because it really should be set to use our guide scale. And I am hoping that side effects will change the default of this. But we'll see. In the meantime, I just want everybody to know that what I'm doing and what I would recommend doing is just changing this to guides. So it works on the guides. And then on the controls tab over here, you'll see it has this R promote group starred, meaning that every joint gets promoted to have this rotation control. I want to have translate and scale as well. So if I put stars over there, now I can scale and I can translate, and we get kind of all the controls that we want. It's also worth noting at this point that I find that a useful thing is to change your sort of layout for your desktop. I've created this Apex layout, and I did that by using the technical layout, which creates a little thing down here and a thing on the side here. The rig tree I find to be useful sometimes. And then the other thing that you're going to want to add down here is a Apex network view. Now, if we go back into our Apex setup here and we look at our rig tree, we'll see, okay, cool. We have base rig, base scale, base shape, and guide scale. And that base rig is sort of a thing that's being started by our auto rig component. And we'll also see if we turn on that auto rig component that now in this Apex network, we have this whole complex graph setup that is basically just setting up our FK setup. So it's a little bit complicated, but don't be afraid of it. It's, again, hopefully something that most people will never have to touch. But it is helpful to be able to like look at it and sort of see what's going on if you want to. And at the end of the day, everything that's in here is basically SOPs nodes. This is all sort of the same stuff that you get in SOPs. And in theory, you can go in here and add other SOP nodes like, a subdivide or a scatter or all these different kind of things. You could do copy to points within your Apex rig. Some really crazy stuff. But again, that's not really what we want to do here. So what we want to do next is create another Apex auto rig component, and we'll just plug that into the left side here. And I'll just call this FK transform just for good measure. The second one here, I can turn on a bone deform, and what we'll see is that now we have basically what the Apex auto rig component is doing is it's editing that Apex graph for us, and it's plugging in this bone deform that over here we don't have. So over here, we're just getting out a base skeleton, which is why when we go into the viewer state, we're actually not seeing our character at all. But if we go into this auto rig component now, you'll see, with the bone deform, now we have this bone deformation node that is the same as the bone deform that we have in KineFX. And it's plugging in that base shape and those same 3 inputs that we need in the bone deform. And then it's plugging this out into the base shape and giving us the base skeleton out as well. So I can call this bone deform. And now we can play with our rig and, test it out. And within these nodes, you can kind of test your rig. But in these nodes is never where you're animating it. And it's not going to save any kind of animation or posing that you do in these nodes. Is an important thing to mention. If you want to do that, we could start animating by using a scene animate or an Apex scene animate. And so if we go into here, now I can set a keyframe on this guy and maybe animate him like that. And now he's going to have some keyframes on him. And cool, now we have some animation. And this will stay persistent. And you'll see over here, if we look at the rig tree now, there's this whole animation data stuff that it's saving as a piece of geometry also. And if we want to get that out of Apex and not have it just be these 5 packed geometries that, importantly, worth noting, also only work in this viewer state. So like if I go out here and maybe I don't have the viewer state enabled, and I'll make like a null over here and plug this in here, we're not going to see any animation. So in order to get that out, and this makes sense also because you're seeing that you don't have that little time icon to show that this is a time-dependent thing. This is part of the whole kind of delayed evaluation thing with Apex. If you want to invoke this scene, you can do a scene, Apex scene invoke, and then you can say, cool, I want to output the rig, and I want to output the base shape, and great. Now I got all that stuff. Or you could say, I want to output the base skeleton, and then you get that skeleton animation. And then what we could do is just do a bone deform at SOP level if you want to be able to take advantage of important SOP stuff. And just plug this guy in here. And now, we could animate with all those kind of benefits of Apex. But then, still do our bone deformation at SOP level. Okay, so what do we want to add next? Well, maybe we should add IK chains for the arms and legs. Well, there's an Apex auto rig component just for that. There's actually several IK related ones, but the one that they added recently is this multi-IK, which lets us use those tags in order to set up IK for stuff. So the segments tab here, by default, it says *_leg. That doesn't match any of the tags that we have. I only use lowercase leg. lowercase l leg. But if I star that there, now that's actually going to correctly set up this IK stuff for my legs. And a lot of the time when I'm doing a character in KineFX, I usually actually don't really bother setting up IK for the arms, because usually I only really want it for the legs, because the legs are the thing where, you know, if you're moving the hips of the character around, you want their feet to stay kind of like locked where they are. But the arms, I think, usually are easier to animate in FK. Now, this is unless you are having a character like lean against a wall and you want that hand to stay placed on the wall, or maybe you're doing some stuff with constraints where, you know, the character is holding an object and you want one of the hands to stay constrained to the object and the other one maybe is what the object is constrained to. So you'd have one of the arms be set up with IK, for example. In the segments, I can also press star arm. And it's also important to note, like, what it also has in here is the driven, is this tag bind. Now, that bind tag is something that is being set on the FK transform auto rig component. It's a little bit confusing, but we want to drive that FK skeleton using our IK setup. So it's creating basically for each of these bones this tag that says bind. And then this thing, this multi-IK setup knows to just work on those bind nodes. So I think that this default is like a good setting here. But yeah, it's worth noting that, you know, it's splitting up the segments leg and arm by basically I have L underscore leg, and so it knows, okay, that's one segment. I have R underscore leg, so it knows that's another segment, and then same for arm. That's pretty much it. The only other thing is you could change like the scale of the controls in here if you wanted, which is kind of cool. And can also change the color of those controls, which is kind of cool. But it's not the only place you can do that. I'm going to just call this node multi-IK, just for good measure. Cool, so what else do we want to add? Well, we don't always want to use IK. Again, as I was saying, I usually don't want to use IK for the arms. So what I might want is some kind of FK-IK switch. And if we use another Apex auto rig component, you will see that there is a IK-FK blend preset. So we can plug that into here. And by default, it seems to be doing something kind of weird with this left leg. You'll see over here, it has nothing in the segments tab, and then it has this, again, the IK nodes that are set as the tag bind. And we don't have like an L leg here. So again, this is a weird default that they have in here for some reason. I'm going to delete this. Okay, and now my whole setup is super broken. Fun. I want to set the segments, again, just like that other node, to be star leg and star arm. And now if I do this, this is maybe looking a little bit better. So we have these weird, like, null cross controllers, whatever you want to call them. And I can animate those, but they don't do anything. And that is because these are basically our new FK controls. And the blend isn't set to be working quite yet. And these weird sort of star controls in here, these are our abstract controls, as we call them in Apex, which allow us to blend between IK and FK setups. So if I click on this here, so we have this part of the control and we have this part of the control. This circle part of the control is basically the transform for me to be able to move this control like wherever I want, so it doesn't have to be in the way for me. And then this part of the control, which I can click on and then I can drag, is the thing that lets me blend between IK and FK. So I can now just animate in FK just using these controls, and then I have my same old FK finger controls from before that I can also use to control the fingers. So another nice thing is that in the IKFK blend node, with the abstract controls, I can actually change the default position. So I could push this along -Z over here to make them like live in front of the character because my character's facing the wrong way on Z, or, you know, I could put them over here. And that's sort of like lets me just tweak sort of the defaults of where those live. The one thing that I don't really like about this setup right now, or the main thing that I don't like about it, is that it creates these cool FK controls that we were just talking about. And again, I can drag that so that now this is working in FK. But the problem is that these, I no longer have access to scale or rotation on them. So that's super annoying. And that's something that I want SideFX to definitely add as a feature of this IKFK blend auto rig component. Because again, I want to be able to tweak those controls and, you know, tweak the positions and not just rotate them. So that's one kind of caveat to be aware of. Otherwise, I would say this would be getting me almost entirely the way there to making sort of a classic character rig that I might use. The last thing that we're missing from this setup is those blend shapes that we set up in the beginning. So I want to use a Apex auto rig component yet again, plug this in here, and there is, thankfully, a blend shape preset. And I will name this blend shapes, and we'll see that that has created all these different dots here with the prefix ball for some reason. Once again, weird sort of preset settings in the auto rig components in Apex. I'm going to change this to blend shape. And now these will be called blend shape _ blend shape. Actually, maybe it doesn't need a prefix then if it already has that blend shape. And once again, these are the same as with the abstract controls, where I can sort of like move these over here. And, you know, it's kind of annoying that they're all in the way like this. But that's just kind of how it is for now. And these abstract controls really, unfortunately, aren't great for the time being. I really do want to have some kind of sliders that I can mess with. But, you know, at least it works. And if you want to create a rig using blend shapes in Apex for the time being, you totally can. You just have to put up with these annoying abstract controls, which again, hopefully soon the devs at SideFX, who I know are super busy, will address. Okay, great. So this is cool and all. Now, if we go back into our scene animate, you'll see, wait a minute, this is just our really basic rig again. And if you want to reset it without getting rid of all the animation, you can go to reset custom and then just tell it that you want to reset everything other than the animation and hit accept. And now we'll get our reset, but you know, you'll see that obviously our character is going to be kind of constrained to all the points and, you know, IKs and constraints and things that we set up in here. And I'll just reset the animation also because we don't need that. Now in here is where we could totally say, all right, let's take a look at like all of these blend shape controls. And if you press Shift V, that toggles the sort of selection set widget, which is really handy. And it shows you kind of the whole skeleton in a nice hierarchy, and all the controls and everything. So you'll see we have this blink L, blink R, closed mouth blend shape, FF blend shape, lips open blend shape, OOO blend shape, RRR blend shape, smile blend shape. I want to move those all over here and just have them not live right there. And I also want to collapse this for a second, right click, and I will say create set from selected. And now I'll have a selection set of the blend shape transform controls. I also want to go in here and make another selection set just using the blend shape abstract controls, the ones that I actually want to use to move around my character or whatever. And I'm going to go in here and just select each of those and then right click and say, once again, create set from selected. And I'll just call this one blend shapes. I'll also select all my abstract control stuff, and I'll right click here and make a set and just call it IKFK blends. Wait a second, that didn't work. Let me select these all, right click, create set from selected, and then I'll call this IKFK blends. So why am I doing all this? Well, it's really handy when you're animating to have selection sets to be able to hide and display certain different things kind of as you want. So I can turn off everything, for example, and then just only show my blend shapes. And then that will make it be much easier when I want to work with just finessing my blend shapes or kind of doing whatever I want there. You could create a selection set for all the head controls if you're just animating the head, or for all the IK controls or whatever. You have kind of like a lot of different options here with the selection sets. And if I press G, you'll see I get this transform tool, which lets me then type in values if I want to not just drag them, or reset the values. So I can kind of clean any animation that I have off any of these controls, which is super, super handy and something that you'll use all the time if you're a character animator. So great, we got some of these selection sets, and I kind of want to just use this scene animate node to set up my selection sets. What you can do is then create another Apex scene animate node. And in here, now this can be where we actually do our animation, but our selection sets and sort of like default, positioning of these controls and stuff will already be set up. So this is something super handy and, kind of worth doing at the end of your rig to just kind of like move around the controls wherever you want and set up those selection sets. I'm hoping at some point also there's a way that they can kind of create procedural selection sets using tags and or using like a tab on the auto rig components. But that is something that Side Effects is going to have to end up adding later. So cool. Now we can animate this character if we want. And, I can move the hip around and all that. If you don't like these controls, it's actually really easy to change the controls. All you have to do is go back up into where you're making your rig or whatever and do a Apex configure controls node. So if we go into here, now we can select the rig source and the skin shape source, and the guide source, we'll call this guides.scale. And I can go in here and basically shape override or shape offset or whatever for any of these controls. So let's say I have, I don't know, the R elbow, and I want to change that so that the shape is now being overridden by like a cone. Now I have a cone for this control, and you can use that to kind of customize any of these things however you want. So another example is I could maybe add another control override, and I could say star finger star, and let's override the shape. You'll see all my finger controls will disappear except for my thumbs, which are named thumb. And if I use this circle wires. Now I have these sort of circle wire controls that I could use instead. And I could also set this to work on the thumb. And so now it'll just affect like kind of all the fingers on each hand. And then I could also use a shape offset and like scale these all down if I want them to not be so big. You know, or I could translate them out so that they, you know, are maybe like easier to control and grab and stuff. And select all these guys, and you know, you can really kind of customize it however you want. So what else is there? If we do another Apex auto rig component, we'll see that there is a Delta Mush, which is just a nice thing to throw on to help sort of smooth out any weirdness in your animation, and the skinning and all that. And another Apex auto rig component is there's a groom deform, which we can look at. There's a look at constraint, which would be great for setting up controls with eyes, but I haven't looked at that at all yet. And there's also this wrinkle deform, which when I plugged this in here, I could not figure out how to get this to work. And then I later found, and I'm not sure again also about these defaults here, big boy and new guy. But there is this other node that is called Apex add wrinkles. And so if we go ahead and plug that in, we'll see that, cool, now we have this wrinkle stuff that is in between the bone deform and the Delta Mush. Now that sounds right. If I go ahead and play with this though now, it doesn't really seem to be doing much. And if I go back to the Delta Mush, it's actually because my Delta Mush is basically smoothing out any of the wrinkles that are being added. Because again, you know, if you look in here, the Delta Mush kind of comes after the wrinkles. So if we just lower the step size of that Delta Mush a bunch, or get rid of it, and then we try doing the same stuff over here, we'll see, oh great, now we got some really nice wrinkles built into the rig, and it's crazy, crazy, crazy how fast this stuff is. Like just having this built into the rig, if I twist the character like this, it's just really insane that this is evaluating so fast. The new wrinkle deformer that they added in Houdini 20.5 is pretty amazing. There's one other cool auto rig component that I've been having a lot of fun playing with, which is the FBIK, which I hinted at earlier. Now, if we plug this in here, it'll actually override the multi-IK and the IK-FK blend, and then just leave these controllers that I don't really want to see there. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bypass these two nodes for now, and I'll call this FBIK. We'll wonder kind of like, well, what's this doing? And you can't see when it creates these controls because it creates them as balls that are the same size as the FK balls, but they're a different color, and it's basically all the FBIK controls that you need to kind of play with this rig. And as a quick reminder, it's setting these up using that FBIK tag. And it's also conveniently not applying this to the fingers. So I can still also use my fingers that have the finger tag. But you'll see I can't use like the R elbow or any of these other controls that aren't being left out here. If there were ones that had twist in the name, those would also be left out based on these defaults. But the drivers are telling it to use anything with the tag FBIK, which again, if you remember, we set up here in the attribute adjust array, right here, 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 on the head, up here, and then on the feet. So that's the reason that it's setting up the controls in those places. Now, what I would recommend probably, if you're building a rig like this, is change this from ball to a different shape. And again, you can find all the shapes in this configure controls node. If you click here, you'll see it's got all these different shape overrides. The one that I like to use is box underscore wires. So if I'm just going to go in here, I can change it and write box underscore wires. And now I have these nice FBIK controls here, and we can use it to animate the character like this. And it should just propagate down through the setup where I have the blend shapes applied afterwards and the delta mush applied after that, and then the add wrinkles. And then I could create a Apex scene animate node right here. And so now what I've done is I've gone ahead and made selection sets for the blend shapes and moved them all over to the side. I've made selection sets for the FBIK controls and for the fingers. And I can just go ahead and turn off everything and then just turn on blend shape, FBIK, and the fingers the way that I want to use them. And now I have this super fun rig that I can just go ahead and play around with. I'll turn off the fingers just so it's easier to just control this. And I can transform these guys, and they all have their own kind of like local transform space. And I can, scrunch them up, and you'll see I get the fun effects of the wrinkle deformer. I get the blend shape stuff that's also going to be affected by the wrinkle deformer, which is really fun and crazy and exaggerated. But what I want to do is play with some of the really cool controls that are built into the Apex animate viewer state. So if you look up here, you'll see that there's a couple of cool features, including this one that I've been having a lot of fun with when using the FBIK rigs, which is the global transform mode. So now if I select all these controls like this, and then I select this one last, and I press Control and Shift, I'll set a keyframe on everything for good measure. And I'll move over to frame 12, let's say. I'll select everything again, select this guy, and then now I can Control Shift, rotate, and it will all rotate around this control. And I can maybe like deselect this one and select this guy instead, and it will all sort of rotate around like this. And it's cool because I'm using this weird FBIK rig, which is being slowed down a lot by the wrinkles. So maybe I'll disable the wrinkles and the delta mush for now. And then I'll have to reset the rig again, accept. And now it'll play back a lot faster. And I can go ahead and move like this leg, for example, over here, and have it so he's maybe like kind of like kicking out a bit into like a fun pose. And then maybe I want to like select these guys all again, hit G and clean it so that it goes back to the sort of base pose here. And I'll have him be in a pose where he's sort of maybe got like his hands on his hips here. And I can even select these all, select this bottom control here and switch into scale mode, and then it will sort of position them all relative, just like scale wise. It's not actually scaling the joints, but it's moving all of those controls together in the global transform mode with, again, I have Control and Shift selected, and it lets me kind of relatively pose and tweak my character like this, which is just like super, super cool. And then maybe I can go like over here, and I'll once again like kind of reset everything, and maybe I'll like move his arm up here, and we're going from there to here. Maybe I'll instead select all these controls and rotate him around this one and move his leg up here like this. And maybe I should probably expose the jaw controls and stuff so I can do stuff with that too. But I can at least play with the blend shapes for now, and hit keyframes on these guys, and then go back down here and over here. Should be able to zero all those out. One of the things that I like about animating this way is that it's super fast, and it's also kind of like ephemeral-ish, where I feel like, sort of what I'm doing is I'm like almost creating these sort of like IK, or rather FK chains on the fly, and then just sort of like deleting them after I'm done posing my character. So yeah, I can rotate, the whole character around like their finger and make it so that, the entire character is like posed like this or whatever, which I think is a thing that Warren from Side Effects demonstrated in the keynote last year, was doing this kind of thing using these global transform modes. But it's just one of the many super fun things that you can do with the Apex viewer state. Now, there's one last thing that I want to show that I think is really fun and gives Apex a lot of potential for these character rigs. Is again, as we were showing in the beginning, I have this groom here on this character that looks super nice in the viewport right now. And I can actually apply that to the rig itself rather than having to have it sort of be added on afterwards using this whole object level hair gen stuff. So I'm going to hide these for now, and I'm going to go back into our setup, and I'm going to do a object merge, and I'm just going to bring in that Regis hair gen right here. Now I'm just gonna, because it's coming in white, give it a little bit of color. So I'll make a color node and plug this in here, and let's make it, I don't know, some dark kind of brownish hair color. And all we have to do to add it to our rig is just use a Apex add groom and plug that in there, plug this guy in there, and then if we play with this, we'll see it's totally sticking to the character, and this works totally great, just completely out of the box. Nothing else that you really need to do here. We go to the Apex Scene Animate. Now, of course, it's not going to have it, and you're going to have to reset custom, and I think we might just have to change these groom ones, but for good measure, I'll just change all this stuff up here. And now we got all this stuff, this whole groom applied to our character. Now it's showing up not shaded as nicely as it was before, and I'm not sure how to get it to show up shaded more nicely in the Apex viewer state. Maybe it's not possible right now, but if we invoke it, we'll see that we do get still an improvement. Just have to change this to export the base shape, and also, actually, I'll just say click this output all character shapes button, and now it'll export it, and it looks a lot better. It's not still that same kind of ribbon. It's that ribbon kind of hair, and it's not the same kind of tube based hair rather, but still it looks pretty good, and it still evaluates, relatively fast in the viewport. But let's say you have like another groom that you want to add also. Now this gets a little bit trickier. So I have, if we go up here to the other hair gen node, I have these sort of peach fuzz guides, and maybe I'll make them, I don't know, a bit brighter like this. And if I want to add these now, the problem is that this is going to call them groom under the hood, and it's going to just overwrite the groom shape and the groom scale, which it's setting up in this node under the hood. So for now, I've RFE'd this with side effects, but if I want to still get this to work in the meantime with a workaround, I can right click and say allow editing of contents, and go in here and see that down at the bottom it's calling this groom shape and groom scale, and I can just change this to say groom peach fuzz and groom peach fuzz there. And then what you have to do is underneath that, there's this Apex auto rig component set up, and we just have to change the name in here as well. And now it's gonna just work. Once again, just have to do a reset custom, select these guys, accept, and great. Now if we go to the scene invoke, we get the peach fuzz as well on Regis. Super fun. And it's cool also that if we turn the wrinkles and stuff back on, you'll see like even now, despite kind of all the blend shapes, wrinkles and all that stuff, the hair is still following perfectly with the skin, and it's all kind of maintaining. And, you know, this is what it looks like in the viewport playing back. Not super fast, because again, we have just like so much crazy stuff going on. If we go back into the scene animate without invoking, it'll definitely play back a lot faster still. But, you know, if you want it to play back the fastest, definitely having wrinkles on, having the groom on, and having the high quality viewport lighting is not going to necessarily help a lot. But it is pretty impressive how quickly everything is playing back despite all that, and how interactive this is. You know, if I turn off the fancy viewport lighting, it's definitely faster. Yeah, it's super fun just playing with all this stuff in Apex. As I was saying, and you probably saw, there's certainly a handful of issues still with rigging with Apex, especially if you want to go this easier route, not having to do a whole bunch of super custom stuff and figuring out Python or Apex script or whatever. But that said, there's also a lot of other cool stuff that I haven't explored yet in Apex. And also keep in mind that this whole thing is still very much in beta. But we're having a lot of fun with it, using it on the film that we're making with side effects. Magnus has made some really complex rigs, not using any of this auto rig component stuff, since we started the film before they even had all that stuff working. But yeah, I'm really excited to see where it goes. I'm going to keep giving feedback to side effects. I certainly was also like struggling with it and not having a lot of fun before I figured out a lot of these weird little sort of nuanced things. But over time, I expect, as with everything that side effects makes, the UX and everything about it will just sort of like improve release after release. So check it out while it's in beta if you're curious, play with it. But also, if you're not psyched about it yet, give it some time and hopefully it'll get there. If you do get the chance to play with it, definitely give side effects your feedback, and, you know, let's help them make this thing really great. But I think it's really promising, and I'm super excited to see where it goes. As always, the HIP file for this project will be available on my Patreon, and I hope you all enjoy playing with this amazing new release from Side Effects, Houdini 20.5. It's been super fun to use, and I think it's the best release that they've done in a long time. So enjoy, and I'll see you soon.